And the gun. Lawrence. Back. Lawrence looks. Firing for the end zone. Intercepted! Nakobe Dean! He picks it off from the end zone. No flags. The Eagles are going to escape.
Welcome to the Philly Film Room Podcast. I'm Nick Waters, and today we have another victory podcast. And it might not feel like it, but the Eagles dominated for much of the game against the Jaguars, and we got several standout performances on both sides of the ball. And the scary part about this victory is the Eagles left a lot of meat on the bone. And we'll get to what everyone wants to talk about, namely Nick Sirianni and some of his decision-making. We'll get to that later in the podcast, but let's first start with this defense because they are really putting together a lot of great performances. First, this defense dominated for much of the game. They allowed defensively less than 20 points. They allowed 31 yards at halftime, and they held the Jaguars to their lowest yardage total, rushing yardage total, first downs allowed, and they got 2 defensive turnovers, which was tied for the most that the Jaguars had given up on the year. And they also got that special teams fumble as well. The game played out really close to how we thought it would in terms of how much man coverage the Eagles ran against the Jaguars. This also turned into more of a Brian Thomas decoy game. He did get play. He wasn't targeted that much. He played, and we could really tell he was more of a decoy in this game because on multiple third downs and situations where the Eagles were in man coverage, he was running a lot of the hitch routes while Parker Washington was running a lot of the first read man-beating routes. So just from that told me that, yes, we are getting the Brian Thomas decoy game. And the Eagles ended up having to rotate coverage to Brian Thomas for much of the game. I do think it was a smart idea for Peterson to go out there and throw Thomas out there, knowing the Eagles were going to have to account for him. They don't truly know how injured he was. So by putting him out on the field, it forced the Eagles to have to play a certain way. And the Eagles rotated the coverage to him a lot, but that would allow things to open up for other guys. It's just unfortunate for the Jaguars for a couple of reasons. Number one, their coaches didn't put their best players into positions to make plays, and then the other guys just couldn't beat the Eagles. So what did the Eagles do to rotate coverage to him? Well, when Brian Thomas was aligned outside, a lot of times they'd play cover 2 to the side, so you'd have a flat corner playing below, then you got a deep safety over top. When he was in the slot, they'd be playing quarters. There was a number of times in the red zone where they were bracketing Thomas they'd play cover 1 and use the post safety to bracket Thomas. And then with their linebackers, they were actually bracketing the running backs out of the backfield as well. They're pretty much saying, Brian Thomas isn't going to beat us in the red zone. The running backs aren't going to beat us in the red zone. Someone else has to beat us in the red zone. So I thought it was a good game plan, not knowing how injured Brian Thomas was. Now, I'm not saying that Brian Thomas, that they rotated to him every single play, but on key downs, they did make sure that he was accounted for on a number of those plays. But they had to rely on other players to step up, and they just struggled overall. Trevor Lawrence, for his part, completed 51.6% of his passes. That was 29 out of the 30 qualifying quarterbacks in Week 9 through the Sunday games. Now, his receiving core had 2 bad drops. One of them led to an interception. Overall, his adjusted completion percentage was 28 out of the 30 qualifying quarterbacks. He had a really bad ball placement on that interception to Nakobe Dean in the end zone. He also had his second longest time to throw of the season this week. We kind of predicted that as well. When you're playing with a lot of replacement players, things just they're not running as efficiently and as smoothly. Guys aren't running routes as crisply or as crisp as they should be or getting to the spots that they need to be. We see this play out week after week when quarterbacks have to play with a new receiving core. So, and that time to throw that he had was 1/100th of a second quicker than his season high. So he was holding on to the ball a lot longer than he usually did. He also had his second highest scramble rate on the season as a result. Now, the Eagles did a really good job of stopping the run. They held the Jaguars to their lowest yards per carry of the season at 3.3, lowest yards after contact on the season at 2.21. No missed tackles forced by Tank Bigsby or Travis Etienne, according to PFF, and that was a huge thing coming into the game. Tank Bigsby has been one of the hardest running backs to bring down in the NFL this season, and they did a really good job of not letting him get going just by dominating at the line of scrimmage and then rallying to the ball and just tackling well as a team overall. You could tell that was definitely an emphasis this week in practice, was tackling, pursuit, making sure guys were getting to the ball. They were able to do this while playing a stacked box on only 5.6% of run plays. That's the second lowest that the Jaguars faced this season. They didn't have to load up the box to stop the run against the Jaguars. This front was playing really well, and that a lot of that's a credit to the front. There was a play I highlighted on Twitter showing why Jordan Davis often doesn't show up in the box score, but the things that he's able to do, eating double teams, allows the linebackers to play free. It allows the Eagles to rotate safeties down late into the box, so you can play with these so you can play with these split field coverages. It allows you to dedicate more resources to stopping the pass because you have guys up front that can take on double teams, right? So even though Jordan Davis might not ever be a guy that is affecting the passer directly at a high rate, the things he is able to do for this defense allows you to play in a way that helps you be better against the pass. Now, the linebackers played really well behind that front, and Dean and Baun, again, had excellent games. Baun continues to show Pro Bowl level play in the run game, pass game, and as a pass rusher. And he was all over the place in this game, sinking into throwing windows, forcing checkdowns, rallying to the ball underneath. He's an excellent mover in space. He covers ground quickly, and he's able to square up on tacklers with ease. That is a big reason why he only has a 6% missed tackle rate, which is 13 of the 86 qualifying linebackers. That is also better than 4 of the 6 All-Pro linebackers last season. The only 2 that are better than him at this point are Bobby Wagner and Roquan Smith, and they are ranked 9th and 10th respectively. But also, these stats I'm about to give you are through the Sunday game, but also Zack Baun ranks 3rd in stop rate, which is 1st of those All-Pros from last season, 4th in tackles per game, 0.1 behind Roquan Smith, 5th in yards per reception, 1st of the All-Pros, 6th in quarterback rating when targeted, again, 1st of the All-Pros. Zack Baun isn't playing at a Pro Bowl level. Zack Baun is playing at an All-Pro level. And I really hope that he gets re-signed, but at this point in time, we also have to remember, it takes 2 to tango, right? Just because the Eagles want to go out and sign Baun right away, Baun might be saying that he is going to have a huge mark in the offseason. It does make sense to one degree to wait until the offseason to try and cash in on this big season. There is also the risk that, injury could come up that could derail that. So it is a risk, but I understand if Baun isn't re-signed right now, part of that might be because he's seeing the market and he's playing that as well. So I always found it interesting that the Eagles were able to get a lot of guys re-signed early and not, when we're able to re-sign Jalen before the rest of the market, re-sign Devontae before the rest of the market, before they're able to reset those markets. That takes 2 people. Those players have to be willing to sign when you want to sign them as well, instead of trying to push the trade market. But I think that speaks to the culture that this team has built from Jeffrey Lurie all the way from the top down. People want to come and play here. They want to build their legacy here. They understand I might be giving up an extra $3 to $5 million per year that I could be making, but I'm building a legacy here. I'm happy playing for a team that is going to commit to winning and not being a team that one of these owners that just owns these organizations because they make money from it every year and they don't really give a shit about the fans or if their team is good. And we see, listen, I live in Chicago. I'm not really a baseball fan or a Chicago sports fan, but the way that Jerry Reinsdorf has treated his fans is just horrible to see. So I'm happy that we have an organization like that, and I don't take that stuff for granted. But getting back to the topic of conversation, listen, if Zack Baun doesn't re-sign, the Eagles are probably going to end up getting a 3rd round comp pick for him in 2026. So either way, the Eagles have cashed in on Zack Baun. They're going to be getting something out of him, whether that's a long-term contract or a comp pick down the line, all for a player that signed for essentially the veteran minimum. So that's how you flip vet minimums into future draft picks. Thank you for that, Vic Fangio. Now, let's look at the Nakobe Dean interception. Number 1, Nakobe talked about this after the game, how he got beat by a very similar play in the offseason and training camp. And that's the thing with training camp. That's the time to figure out what you're good at and what's your weaknesses. Figure out how our team's going to try and attack you. Those are the times to get beat. You want to get that stuff figured out then. What's great to see is that he learned and overcame from that and understood, because he went to talk to Jalen in the offense about why they threw that route and just to learn a little bit more. And he understood he's the mark on that play. When they're in man coverage, teams are going to try and go after Nakobe Dean in the pass game. It's kind of on the scouting report, but Dean did a really good job of understanding that he was the mark, that he is a guy that was probably going to be the one that was getting targeted. And then you add into that, he did a really good job of playing to his leverage in the play. Remember, I talked about earlier that what they were doing with Brian Thomas in the red zone, bracketing him with the deep safety, and then they were bracketing the running backs with the linebackers. On that play, they motion over. You see Zach Bond fly over to the opposite side of the field, and you see that they're bracketing him, the running back out of the backfield. Nakobe essentially cannot let the running back get outside of him, and he does a really good job of not chasing a running back inside, making sure he's playing to his leverage. And then he stays over top of the route when the the running back starts to break upfield. So Nakobe did a really good job of understanding what the offense was trying to do, trying to accomplish. He understood his assignment and his job and his role in the defense. He didn't try and do something that he wasn't supposed to do by committing to chasing a running back inside. He stuck to his leverage, did a really good job putting himself into position to make a play. And then when the ball was in the air, did an excellent job to box out and high point and come down with the interception. That was an awesome play from Nakobe Dean. And if he keeps this play up as well, the Eagles might have 2 Pro Bowl linebackers on their hands. Now, let's look at some other players. It's mostly a positive day from the defense, but I do need to touch on CJ Gardner-Johnson. He's been getting beat a lot in coverage, and it really comes down to one simple thing. His eye placement has to be better. His eye discipline has to be better. We've touched on this in previous podcasts. He's just getting into a bad habit of looking back at the quarterback and losing track of his guy when he's in man coverage. I think if he does a better job of that, he's going to fix a lot of these issues that he's having on defense. But that again, this is something that the coaches have probably identified through multiple weeks this season, right? If I'm seeing this, I guarantee you the coaches are seeing this as well. And it hasn't really been fixed to this point in time. So that's something that is a little concerning. And I do wonder, to a degree, do we start to see Sidney Brown at some point play on this defense? The guy brings a lot to the defense. You see the plays that he made on special teams. When you make plays like that on special teams, coaches look for ways to put you on the field. He almost had an interception. He played like 5 snaps in his first game back and almost had an interception on one of those few snaps that he played. So I do wonder, to a degree, do we start to see Sidney Brown get to rotate in and get to mix in a little bit? It is difficult to have a rotation like that at safety because communication is so huge and so important. And if you're constantly rotating guys in like that, the communication can become an issue. That is something to think about as well. But some other defensive notes. Josh Sweat really took advantage of a plus matchup and got 2 sacks. No sacks for Jalen Carter, but he was disruptive. 5 total pressures. It was the highest pressure rate allowed from Brandon Scherf this season. And remember, he was 8 out of 72 qualifying offensive guards and pressure rate allowed this season. Quinyon Mitchell, Isaiah Rodgers, and Cooper DeJean all made a number of good plays in coverage. Rodgers had a couple plays he could probably tighten up on. I think one of the catches, I wouldn't put too much blame on him. He's expecting underneath help from Nakobe Dean, who ends up chasing a route into the flat, and it opened up a throwing window that really shouldn't have been there. But overall, I thought that was a good performance from this unit, from this young group of corners. And then we need to touch on Bryce Huff. When I had written these notes, I needed to find out more info about the hand injury, but it does appear that from what Vic Fangio said, it's more of a wrist injury. It appears that it isn't anything too serious. Now, there's about 2 hours left in the trade deadline as of this recording. I wanted to wait a little bit later in the day, see if we got some Eagles news. But as soon as the Marshon Lattimore news came out, I was like, all right, it's been late long enough. We got some trade deadline talk that we can talk about. So I don't think Huff is going to get traded. There's a lot of contract implications that would not make sense to trade Huff. I don't think he should be traded anyways. When you look at the fact that Nolan Smith and Brandon Graham had a really plus matchup that they should have taken advantage of, you can just tell the difference. When you know what you're looking for, you can tell the difference between Huff and BG and Nolan Smith when it comes to rushing the passer. He's just a much more refined and skilled pass rusher. He's got more burst off the edge. You started to see that the Jags at the beginning of the game were trying to use a lot of their protection plan that they probably had schemed up for Huff, but they didn't know Huff wasn't going to be playing in that game. You started to see them give BG and Nolan Smith more one-on-one opportunities throughout the game. BG got a couple pressures, but I don't think these guys really capitalized in a way to say, like, all right, they really need to be taking snaps away from Huff. I think they need to get Huff back on the field as soon as they can. So we'll see what's the deal with this wrist injury and what's going on with that. Hopefully he can get back soon. But overall, I thought the defense had a really solid day across the board. A lot of positives to take away from this. And hopefully we can keep this rolling. They're probably not going to get tested this week against the Dallas Cowboys, but they'll have a big matchup the week after that against the Commanders. Now, moving on to the offense. The offense also dominated for a large portion of the day. Their 447 yards was first among any team in Week 9. Their 28 points was sixth. Their 6.1 yards per play was fifth. Their 5.2 yards per carry was seventh. And let's keep this in mind. The Jaguars were sixth in yards per carry allowed coming into the week. And the crazy thing is, I think the Eagles left a lot of big plays on the field. And I'm talking more so execution-wise. Yes, were there some decision-making things that you may want back? We'll talk about that a little bit later. But even execution-wise, this team left a lot of meat on the bone. So we'll get to that later. Let's talk about some of the good. The offensive line just absolutely dominated people in the run game. It's going to be hard for any team to slow down this rushing attack and this offensive line. The only way you can really slow it down is hope that they have injuries. Now, there are going to be some better run defenses that they play, but the way that they are just absolutely moving guys off the line of scrimmage, it's hard to see a defense that is going to come in and slow these guys down like that, you know? And we've seen teams load up the box week after week after week trying to stop these guys, and they just can't. Now, the Jaguars tried to defend the run with light boxes, and I have a video coming out, and the next video I'm going to have come out is going to discuss my 5 favorite plays from this Eagles game, and we're going to discuss a little bit of how the Eagles took advantage of the Jaguars trying to defend the run with light boxes. But week after week, we see defenses trying to load up the boxes, slow down this Eagles rushing attack. Number one, they have a good scheme to remove guys from the box or force the unblocked defender, the extra defender that the defense is supposed to have, to be a nickel or to be your outside corner or even a safety. They really don't want that guy to be a linebacker, right? You want it to be one of the guys that are not as willing to tackle and just not as good of tackling, right? So they've done a really good job with that scheme. But this offensive line is just absolutely dominating people. When you look at Mekhi Becton on any combination or double team block, it's a real problem for the NFL. Now, there are some times where he sticks on these combos a little bit too long and doesn't get off and move to the linebacker. Those plays need to get cleaned up a little bit, and I think that's more of execution stuff. They can get to that and fix some of that stuff. But Becton has a real superpower to torque and displace anyone out of the gap in front of him. He single-handedly opens up gaps on his own. Listen, I like Steen. He's got better foot quickness. There are things I think he does a little bit better than Becton, but he can't open holes the way that Becton does. That is a real superpower that Mekhi Becton has, and the Eagles are weaponizing it for sure. But the rest of the offensive line was doing great work creating vertical and horizontal displacement all across the line of scrimmage. Even Jack Stahl and Grant Calcaterra have gotten in on the fun in the run game. And then you look at Saquon averaged 2.9 yards per carry before contact, which was 4th among backs in Week 9, and it really led to a huge Saquon Barkley game. He was first in rushing yards. He was first in explosive runs, which are runs of 10 plus yards. He had 6 of those. He was absolutely embarrassing defenders.
Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how I ended up in this situation.
That's gonna be the play of the week.
Yeah, it should be. You ain't never seen no like that.
On the play that has now been seen around the world, he had the fake option and go for a touchdown that showed off his tracking, his catching ability, his spatial awareness to get his feet in bounds. I mean, Saquon Barkley is playing at an MVP level right now, and I don't know what his odds are, but he should probably be getting more love than what he is getting. I imagine he won't, though, because, I mean, teams are going to say this roster is too loaded for Saquon to be an MVP or really anyone on this team, but it's just, I mean, who cares, man? Us against the world at this point in time. But you also have Devontae Smith stepping up on a huge number of plays in the fourth quarter, especially after AJ went down. On one particular drive, he had a 3rd down conversion on a tight window throw. I think this play isn't being talked about enough. It was a really, really good throw and catch by Jalen. The very next play, they have a deep post for 46 yards. And then a couple plays later, after penalties push them back to 3rd and 22, Devontae comes up with a Devontae Smith play that only Devontae Smith can make, with that insane one-handed catch to get his feet down in the end zone. It was also a beautifully placed ball by Jalen Hurts. And when we look at Jalen Hurts' day, he made a number of huge plays in the pass and run game. First of all those throws to Davante were awesome. Let's touch on that third down play just a little bit. That ball placement had to be perfect, right? The linebacker was flying. The middle hole defender at linebacker, reading Jalen's eyes, is flying to Davante on the slant. Jalen had to put this ball just behind Davante enough so the linebacker can't reach out and tip it, but not too far behind where Davante can't put himself in a good position to make the catch. So that was a great play by Jalen. If they don't get that play, that conversion right there, they're not going down to score that touchdown that ultimately puts them up 2 possessions again. Now, he had that dime to Saquon for the touchdown. And then in the run game, after this, it's funny how this shit works out, man, sometimes. After giving out all the reasons why Jalen's rushing numbers have been declining, including showing his evolution as a pocket passer and how he's choosing to stick and stay in the pocket a little bit more, he goes on to have his second biggest rushing day of the year. But, football be like that sometimes. So it is what it is. I would probably run back the same exact scenario again. Listen, Jalen is evolving as a passer. He's really trying to hang in the pocket. They're hitting much bigger plays in the pass game because he isn't taking off and running when the opportunities are presenting themselves. He's sticking to the play designs more and more, and it's really starting to pay off. Now, let's look at Fred Johnson. He's been left on an island repeatedly over these past several weeks against really tough pass rushers. And for a backup tackle being left on an island against some of the guys that he's having to go against, he's playing about as well as you could expect him to play going against the competition that he's faced. His first sack was more of a coverage sack. The second one was a good play by the defensive end to Freelance. Once he was getting chipped, he dove inside. Just a good play by the defender. It's a tough play for Fred Johnson. I'm not going to hate on him too much for that one. Listen, he does find his anchor late. The pocket gets tight. It doesn't always look pretty, but this guy is getting the job done. Now, there were a lot of plays left on the board, and that's what is so, on one hand, frustrating to see from the offense, but it's also like, look, they still have so much room to grow and improve, and they're dominating to this degree. It is scary for the rest of the NFL right now. But there was a lot of plays left on the board. Jalen airmailed 2 passes over the middle, one to A.J. Brown on the first play of the game, another to Devontae Smith, who was running, it looked like an option route out of the backfield. They were both near interceptions. You can't miss throws high when you're throwing over the middle. It leads to overthrows, tip passes that fall into a defender's hands. If anywhere, you want to miss low, but also at the same time, if you're trying to layer the ball over top of a defender, it's going to be tough to, laser these passes in low. So it depends on the coverage and the type of route that you're trying to throw. But you really cannot be airmailing those passes. Jalen was also late to AJ on a crossing route on 4th down. He also missed on what would have been a guaranteed touchdown on a seam throw against cover 2 during the last 2 minutes. And then on that same play, there was a check down available. They scored a touchdown on the drive, but here's the thing. The process is more important than the results right there. You want to see Jalen make and take those throws, especially when they scored on a 3rd and 17 draw play. You can't really rely on that. But on that same drive, Saquon had a drop. Johnny Wilson had a pass interference on a touchdown in the end zone. And then on another series, Saquon Barkley stepped out of bounds short of a first down on a play. And this is a different play than the end of game scenario when he went down early trying to stay in bounds to keep the clock running. Again, another scenario, probably could have fought for a first down and they end up having to punt the ball away a couple plays later. But we've now seen Saquon step out of bounds early on a couple plays this year. So there are certain plays where he needs to make sure he's finishing these runs and getting the first down. Because what happens next? Then Jalen's inaccurate on an RPO. Then the very next play, Saquon is stuffed on a 3rd and 1 run play. And then the Eagles go for it on 4th down. We'll get to that decision and the play call later. But on another play, the fumble that probably shouldn't have been a fumble, it was a wrong decision on the RPO. Jalen he should have pulled and thrown to either the tight end in the slot or to Devontae Smith out wide. Jalen came back to this play later in the game on the earlier series that I was talking about when Saquon stepped out of bounds. That RPO that they threw that he was inaccurate to Devontae Smith on, he came back, made the right read, and just was inaccurate, right? So on this play, this fumble, he made the wrong decision on the RPO. The defense had an unblocked defender to the ball. And then at the end of the day, ball's on the ground. They still have to go and tackle the guy. And this happens a lot when guys on offense have an opportunity to tackle guys, they try and clean their clock instead of wrapping up. And then you see plays when these highlight reel plays that go the wrong way. Now, there are some things we need to touch on. I really want to touch on the tush push because the Jags showed a couple different variations, and I think they showed off the most important factor to stopping the play. I think they really laid the blueprint for how you want to defend this run. And really, it's by running their own tush push back against the offense, right? So on all the plays at the goal line, they had a defender with their hands on the hips of the defensive tackle directly behind the center. On the first play, the Jags had one defender with their hands on the hips of the defensive tackle, pushing him into the center. And then they had an emphasis on having defenders come from the side to grab and try and pull and drag Jalen down. Now, we've seen several different variations from teams of trying this drag down method. Some of those tactics have been absolute ass, but there's 31 teams that are trying to figure out how to stop this play. I think teams are really trying to go with this method of grabbing Jalen and trying to drag him down to the ground. Now, I think this is easily fixable. I would use one of the pushers to kind of act as a kickout blocker on the left side. Defenses know that the Eagles want to, for the most part, run this play to the left. So you saw the Jaguars try and come from the left and pull and drag Jalen down. And it worked because they grabbed his arm and grabbed the ball and started tugging him away from the goal line, right? So that was a good play by them. But you really only need two tush pushers when you're running this play. So use that third guy as more of a kick-out blocker for those guys that are coming and trying to jump on top of Jalen. But the second play, the second time they got stuffed, this is the most important play. And I think this is the biggest cause for concern of any play or any decision that was made on Sunday, because if they can't figure out a way to overcome some of what the Jaguars did, you're going to see other teams trying to implement this strategy. And this might turn from a play that we were running at a 92% clip, and that percentage of conversions is just going to drop significantly, right? So what did the Jaguars do? They had three defenders with their hands on the hips of defensive tackles in front of them and were pushing back, right? So they were fighting fire with fire. Teams in the past, really what they had done is use their defensive line to kind of just stop that initial wave. And then after that, there's no one left to help push back against. Whereas the Eagles they have their initial line that's pushing, but then you got that secondary push. But now when you got a defense that is having two guys push into the center, what you saw happen was Cam Jurgens got pushed directly back into Jalen's lap. And that is a big problem for the defense. I know a lot of people were online saying this is, without Mailata, this is a much tougher play to run because it's a run to the left. Number one, if that is the case, with Mailata out, switch Becton over to the left tackle. There's a number of plays where they have in the past just moved Lane Johnson next to Jordan Mailata, and they run essentially a tackle over play. Listen, there's no disguising. Everyone knows what the play is coming. Get your guys in the best position to make those plays. So if that is the issue, then fine, go with that. But Fred Johnson has been pushing and getting surge on his own as well. Is Mailata better at that? Sure. But the biggest issue on the play was not the surge from the left side of the line. It was Cam Jurgens getting pushed back into Jalen's lap. If that doesn't get corrected, this play will not work. Okay? Now, you saw the Eagles try and come up with some they essentially came up with a new play where they run a quarterback sweep, and I think that does a good job because that makes your linebackers have to take a step back and flow to the left, right? So I thought that was a good play, and I hope we see that kind of continue in the next games that we play. But the fact is, I hope they take away that motion that kind of telegraphed what they were doing. I think they'll take that away. They probably didn't get the reaction from the defense that they were hoping for. So seeing that, I think they're going to understand now. They're probably just going to line up and run the quarterback sweep if that's how they want to run that play, right? But the way to stop that play is to have your own pusher pushing back against the Eagles' push as well. So hopefully we can get some of that stuff taken care of. Now, rewatching that tush push, I now understand more to a degree why Nick Sirianni decided to run a different play on that 4th and inches play where they decided to run that play action rollout and leak the running back to the flat. I understand it was 4th and inches, but it wasn't an execution issue in my mind for the Eagles on that play. It was a fundamental shift in how the defense was defending the tush push. So I think they saw the fact that they just got absolutely knocked back on that play and they didn't feel comfortable running that play right there. So I understand to a degree. What's important now is how do they respond? How do they make changes to fix some of the stuff that was going on? Now, talking about some of the decision making, I really do not care about the 2-point conversions that they were going for. It was early in the game. They were up 16 against a team that they were absolutely dominating. A lot of teams will go for the first down if you give them the 1 yard line, especially on a play that they've hit at over a 90% rate. I understand why they would go for that play at that moment in time. And here's the thing. I'm glad they went for it because it's uncovering issues that they're having running the play. They need to get these issues fixed now instead of in the playoffs when maybe they need to go for a 2-point conversion late in the game. If that was the first time that they were figuring out what some of these issues are, that would be a much bigger issue than going for a 2-point conversion up 16 against a team that they were dominating and really continued to dominate for much of the rest of the game. My biggest gripe by far was not kicking the field goal to go up 2 scores. Listen, it was still the third quarter, so there was time left. I understand it's not the biggest factor, but there's still an opportunity to go up 2 scores. I think he should have kicked a field goal there. But listen, the Sirianni hate is just getting way, way too far overboard at the moment. It's like every single decision is put under a microscope when, listen, there's 60 to 70 plays in a game. There are going to be plays that coaches want back, play calls that they want back. There's also play calls that plays that the players want back as well that they messed up on, that they didn't execute well on. There's plays that the refs want back where they miss calls. It's going to happen. But if we're doing this thing where every single moment is put under a microscope, we're missing the bigger picture here. The Eagles have started 6-2 for the past 3 seasons. They did that 3 times in the previous 19 seasons combined. Sometimes we take for granted how hard it is to do things like that in the moment, especially when you see the fact that they've been dealing with injuries to the offensive line, to key pieces on their offense, and they still have come out and been a very hard team to compete with. And listen, look around the rest of the league. There are teams in real turmoil with their head coaches, right? Nick is an actual leader of this team that has the team bought in. You can tell that they're playing hard and they're playing committed for each other, right? That is not to be taken for granted when you look at the culture that has been built. You look at other coaches in the NFL, you got the guy that everyone loves, Shane Steichen, football genius, but he's losing control of his locker room, making rash decisions when things get tough. Things are going to get tough in the NFL. How do you react when things get tough? That shows you the character. I shouldn't say character, but that shows you the resolve and your worth as a coach, right? You look at Doug Peterson. He has failed to recognize that he continually puts his same favorite guys on his coaching staffs, and it's failing him. You look at what happened in this game, the coaching differences in this game, the coaching malpractice that was going on with the Jaguars in this game, right? Namely, dialing up a deep shot and a got to have a moment in the fourth quarter to your third string running back. And then Peterson didn't back down from it. He said, we game plan and scripted for this coming into the game. Why wouldn't you run that with your best receiving back, right? With Travis Etienne. I don't know why they're doing that with their third string running back. Imagine if we put Will Shipley in on that option and go route that Saquon scored on. And imagine if we did that in the fourth quarter needing to win. What this fan base would do, how pissed they would be, and really calling for Nick Sirianni's head at that point in time. Then you look at their personnel usage. We need to talk about 2 players, Evan Ingram and Britton Strange. They are very, very similar to the Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert scenario that the Eagles had when Doug Peterson was here. Evan Ingram, last year, 2nd in receptions by a tight end ever. You know who's number 1? Zach Ertz. Now, you look at Goedert and Strange. Goddard drafted in the 2nd round. Strange, 2nd round pick as well. You look at their athletic profiles, they are eerily similar to each other. And there's several plays on tape this year of Strange being a seam stretcher, of him having these angry runs and just being a legitimate route runner from the slot. He leads the Jaguars tight ends in yards per reception and yards after catch per reception. And then they go out and play their tight end 3 more snaps than Britton Strange last week. It was the least snaps that Britton Strange has ever played in a game. After having a 59-yard game the week before, when they had to throw him out there once they started dealing with all these injuries, he stepped up and had a great game. And then in a game where they're down there, 2 of their top 3 receivers and their other wide receiver is more of a decoy, they relied on their 4th, 5th, and 6th string receivers over their 2nd round pick, who has been one of their better players on offense, right? Imagine if the Eagles did that with their players. Put the very similar scenario with the Eagles players and think about how would you feel if Nick Sirianni went out there and that was a game plan that they rolled out with, right? That is coaching malpractice. I understand some of the decision-making might be frustrating, but we are missing the forest for the trees when we are complaining about some of this stuff. You look at guys like Andy Reid and Kyle Shanahan, they're notorious for bad game management. We'd run them out of town too. Oh wait. Anyway, we look at Boy Wonder in Miami. Mike McDaniel has all these fancy play designs, but they have a soft as baby shit team. They physically and mentally. They ran Fangio out of town because they can't handle the tough coaching. And you look at what happens with Fangio, it comes to a team that's willing to put in the work, that is willing to take some of the criticism that comes their way. And this team is dominating on defense, right? So let's not forget, football is a tough game played by tough people. There's a reason why Dan Campbell turned around the dysfunctional organization that was the Detroit Lions. And there's also a reason why he's probably ultra aggressive as well, sometimes to a fault. But you know what? You live by the sword, you die by the sword.
A man must have a code. Oh, no doubt.
And let's not forget, being aggressive brought this team a Super Bowl. So this Eagles team is a tough team. This Eagles team is going to be able to travel on the road, in the playoffs, in the cold, because they're physical in the trenches up front. They're physical on the back end. They are a tough team, and that will help them win games throughout the year. So you see things online saying Sirianni was saved by Dean, and my question is, from what? It didn't save him from criticism. You know, Dean also saved the offense that made several mistakes on their own. Some of those plays and decisions that Sirianni had to make, the players put him in those situations to have to make those tough decisions. You get to a situation where your running back runs out of bounds early in a first down. Listen, there shouldn't have been that scenario anyways. And then you get an inaccurate pass, and then you get a stuff on third down, and now you're sitting there having to make a decision. Do I kick or do I go for it? They should have had the first down in the first place, you know? So Dean saved the offense from mistakes as well. But listen, are we trying to say Dean saved Nick Sirianni from getting fired? Because I have news for you. Unless this team has a major collapse down the stretch like last year, Nick Sirianni isn't going anywhere. And we need to get on board with that. A lot of people have built their online personalities about hoping a guy gets fired. And at some point, we need to let it go and understand this team has consistently been a tough physical team year after year. They continue to be a team that everyone fears playing, right? And so you don't find coaches like that all the time. You know, we don't see a lot of I know people don't like the scheme stuff and this and that, but there is a value of having a leader that gets people organized and headed in the same direction. And also think about the fact that he took advice from some of his veteran leadership, listened to it, and then went with it. That is showing that he's putting his ego down and willing to listen to the guys on his team. You think the players don't appreciate that and feel like their voice is heard and makes them want to commit more to the team, knowing that they have some ownership over this offense as well. Listen, Nick Sirianni's here to stay. We're back on board. And listen, keep the hating to yourself because I don't really care to hear it. But you know what? I want to talk on just for a second about the Commanders getting Marshon Lattimore. And you know what? I actually think this is a good thing for the Eagles. Number one, Marshon is scared of Saquon Barkley. And a moment and a big play in the game against the Saints, Marshon Lattimore had an opportunity to step up and tackle Saquon Barkley. That fight or flight moment kicked in. And Marshon showed that he's got more flight than fight. There was a number of other plays where he quit on plays, blew coverages. I am not scared of Marshon Lattimore. Okay. The Commanders' biggest issue is their run defense, and this didn't help with any of that. Second to that, if the Commanders think that they are going to be able to come out and play more man coverage against the Eagles because they got Marshon Lattimore, thank God, because the Eagles will torch them in man coverage. So I like the Marshon Lattimore trade for the prospects of the Eagles. Yes, that is an upgrade for their offense. But if it's going to lure them into a false sense of security that they can stop this Eagles offense running man coverage, they're going to be in for a rude awakening. So that will be it for today's podcast. We'll be back on Thursday to preview the game against the team from down south. But as always, make sure to like, subscribe, spread the word. And until next time, go Birds.